Hello students, today we will study literature from Indian languages in translation. Today we will take up a very famous Bengali novel called Panchali. It is written by Bibhutibhushan Bandopadhyay and it is a classic in Bengali literature. It was Bibhutibhushan's first novel. It first appeared as a serial in a periodical in 1928 and was published as a book in 1929. It was adapted into a film bearing the same name by Satyajit Ray, which went on to be critically acclaimed. Bibhutibhushan Bandopadhyay was born on September 12th in 1894. He is considered one of the greatest Indian authors. In 1921, he published his first short story, Upekshita, in Probashi, one of the leading literary magazines of Bengal at that time. However, it was not until 1928, when his autobiographical novel Panchali was published, that Bibhutibhushan got critical attention. With Panchali, he became a prominent name in Bengali literature instantly. He passed away on November 1st in 1950. He was awarded the Rabindra Puraskar, the most prestigious literary award in West Bengal, posthumously in 1951. This novel belongs to the genre of coming of age story known as Bildungsroman. It is a literary genre that focuses on the psychological and moral growth of the protagonist. The Bengali word path literally means path and pather means of the path. Panchali refers to a type of narrative folk song that used to be performed in Bengal. Therefore, the title means Song of the Road. It is a vivid, moving and authentic portrayal of the life of a Brahmin household seen through the eyes of the two young children of the family, Opu and his elder sister Durga. Few authors in any literature can rival Bibhutibhushan's understanding of the child mind. He writes of Opu and Durga and their friends at home or out at play with a natural realism unmarred by adult condescension. The social environment is all embracing: work and holidays, religious festivals, daily worship, and grim rites of death. The reader senses the reality of family ties, the power of the supernatural in ordinary things, the relations between the castes and between the rich and poor. Panchali transports the reader to a time and place which has a heartwarming charm which is becoming rarer by the day. A child's imagination, the joyful adventures of young siblings, simplicity of rural Bengal life, and close to soil backdrop all have been intertwined to create a literary magic. The story is set in rural Bengal of the 1920s. It focuses on the lives of Opu, the young protagonist of the novel, and his family members. Opu's impoverished family lives in the dilapidated ancestral home in the village Nishchindipur. Opu's father, Harihar Rai, earns a meager living as a priest. He dreams of a better career as an author of scholarly plays and poems. He is easily exploited in his work. He cannot even muster the courage to ask his employer for overdue wages, although his family is in dire need of money. Horihar's wife Sarbojoya takes care of their two children, Durga and Opu, and her elderly sister-in-law, Indir Thakurun. With limited resources, Sarbojoya resents having to share her home with Indir Thakurun. Occasionally, Indir takes refuge in the home of another relative when Sarbojoya either forces her out or becomes overly offensive. Durga often steals fruit from a neighbor's orchard and shares it with Aunt Indir, with whom she feels some filial affinity. Once, the wealthy neighbor blamed Durga for stealing a bead necklace. Sarbojoya bears the neighbor's innuendos, blaming her for Durga's propensity to steal. Durga, as the elder sister, cares for her brother Opu with motherly affection, although she does not spare any opportunity to tease him. They share the simple joys of life, such as sitting quietly under a tree, running after the candy man who passes through the village, viewing pictures in a bioscope shown by a travelling vendor, and watching a jatra by a troupe of actors. In the evening, they can hear the whistle of trains far away. Horihar, unable to make a good earning in the village, decides to travel to nearby cities to search for a better job. During his absence, the family sinks even deeper into poverty. The monsoon approaches and storm clouds gather. One day, Durga dances playfully in the downpour for a long time. Soon she catches cold and develops a fever. With the scarce medical care available, her fever continues and eventually, on a night of incessant rain and gusty winds, she dies. Horihar returns home and starts to show Sarbojoya the merchandise he has brought from the city. Sarbojoya breaks down and Horihar screams as he discovers that he has lost his daughter. The family decides to leave the village and their ancestral home. As they start packing, Opu finds the necklace that Durga had earlier denied having stolen, and he throws it into a pond so that nobody can find it. The family leaves for Benares after the untimely death of Opu's sister Durga. There Horihar dies and Opu's mother takes up a cook's job. The story ends with Opu and his mother longing to go to a new destination, and they decide to come back to their own village once again. Students, as this Pather Panchali is a translation from a regional language, I will pronounce the names of the characters and the names of the places the way Bengalis pronounce it, so that you get some regional flavor. Apu, Apu's father, Harihar Ray, Sarvajaya. Otherwise, you may keep as the Bengalis pronounce it, like Opu, Sarvajaya, Harihar Ray. The plot of the book is partly based on Bibhutibhushan's early life and childhood. He walked miles in the woods every day. He usually took his notebook with him and loved to write surrounded by the wilderness. He wrote in his autobiography, here I am quoting, "Born in this age, I will collect the various experiences of this strange livelihood and will leave a memorandum of them." Unquote. After the publication of this book, he presented it to some dignitaries and signed as Opu. In the novel, very often Opu's perception is evidently the author's viewpoint and philosophy. Here, the 5 main characters resemble real-life characters. Opu's father, Harihar Rai, like the author's father, is a Brahmin scholar, Panchali reader, by profession a poor priest, and dreams of writing books. Opu's mother, Sarbojaya, like the author's mother, has to look after the family somehow with meager resources. She is totally submerged in the thought of taking care of the family and never expects anything else from life other than being able to feed her children decently. Even Indi Thakurun resembles the author's distant aunt who became the unwelcome dependent of the family. Opu's sister too is a direct reflection of the author's own sister. Both had the same name Durga and both died early. Most important of all is the character of Opu, who is inseparably united in temperament with the author. Both had the same upbringing in rural Bengal, spending time on the bank of the river or in the forest, daydreaming, poor but content, loved nature intensely, and shared many incidents narrated in the novel. Such novels belong to a particular genre called autobiographical novel. In this genre, many incidents are taken from the author's own life, but as it is not an autobiography, a unique form is given to that life by using the method of acceptance and omission of the various incidents according to the author's choice. The author's philosophy of life is presented as the protagonist's philosophy of life, but the specific incidents and the characters may or may not be true. The base is autobiographical, but the storyline is imaginative. Hence, such books are fiction. Therefore, we see that Pather Panchali is an autobiographical novel. The novel is set in a remote Bengali village in the early years of the 20th century. The principal characters are a young brother and his sister, Opu and Durga, growing up in abject poverty. The pictures of the village and of the villagers are vivid and fascinating, but this is not a social document. The poverty and hardships are taken for granted. Bibhutibhushan was more interested in the development of the children's mind and imaginations, and in those apparently trivial events that shape the people they might one day become. It captures the way a child sees the world in a particularly charming and unpretentious manner. It is a very touching story of the lives of ordinary Indians under excruciating poverty in the pre-independence Bengal. In a very simple yet powerful language, the author has woven an intricate web of human emotions, expressed through the eyes of 2 beautiful young children. The description of the life of Bengal in those days is near flawless. It is often said that poverty cannot be explained, it has to be experienced, and this book stands tall as a testimony to it. The range of moods evoked is astonishing, from the playful to the frightening, from the joyous to the tragic. In particular, the depiction of the fearful monsoon storm and the disaster it brings in its wake is not something the readers can easily forget. The other interesting thing about the story is how tangential British presence is in the story. We hear about a now defunct factory near the village. We see the train tracks and we see a somewhat ridiculous westernized family putting on airs. But ultimately, the world they live in is so small that Sarbojaya, the mother of Opu and Durga, has never been to a temple just 6 miles away in the 10 years she lived in the village. It is a kind of pre-colonial life that could have been described almost identically if it had been set in the 1660s. This is an excellent book set in rural Bengal. The author's beautiful description of the mind of the child is really fascinating. The writing gives a feeling of reality to the description. There is actually a lot of sorrow in the book. However, the best part is that it is not overly sentimental. The sorrow is subtle. One can't help being moved after reading this book. Pather Panchali is a somewhat slow, silent story of Opu and Durga, two children belonging to a sleepy village in Bengal, as they search for wild berries and leaves, steal mangoes from their neighbors, get beaten, play chorus, get lost and discover trains. Their lives are simple and their stories are simply told. The readers get a sense of the rarefied natural beauty that village life holds. The impact of this book on the readers of both rural and urban upbringing is tremendous. Those who had left behind the simple, dreamy days of their rural childhood have found the world back, and those that did not have the opportunity to enjoy such a rural life have found a strangely fascinating world. When this book appeared, Bengal was reeling under the mortifying load of economic and political restlessness. Bibhutibhushan offered them as a balm the story of a dream world long bygone, the story of two children being brought up in an unknown remote village, their joy and sorrow depicted under the backdrop of calm, serene, charming and pleasant nature. The uniqueness of Bibhutibhushan is that he is able to bring in the joy of strangeness in the very familiar surroundings. When Opu is struck with wonder on seeing the village Amdob, the author comments, "What you may notice on your way, what may strike you as a novelty, what your hungry eyes are swallowing incessantly in your own world, you too are an explorer of countries. There is no hard and fast rule that you have to travel the world to get the joy of strangeness. Where you have not come before, you step there. You take a dip in a river you have never done before. You get solace in the breeze of a new village. How does it matter to you if anybody has come there before or not? For you, that land is still unexplored." Finding the strange in the familiar, that is Bibhutibhushan's philosophy in appreciating nature. Opu is the protagonist of the novel. In the history of Bengali literature, Opu is an amazing character. He does not have any of the characteristics of the hero of other novels. He does not have any influence on the course of the action of the novel, as heroes do. But the incidents of the novel revolve around Opu. His ordinary life is depicted with the backdrop of the calm and limited Nishchindipur village. Opu's full name is Apurva Roy. In Bengali, it is pronounced as Apurbo Rai. His childhood is spent in the company of his sister Durga. He is not like other children of his age. He has a very soft mind, and it is reflected in his soft, girlish appearance. The author mentions his large, black, attractive eyes again and again. His main characteristic is his dreamy nature. His innocence too is reflected in his eyes. Outwardly, Opu is very shy, but with his mother he acts differently. Very easily he feels touchy. His sensitive nature comes out in trivial matters, especially in matters connected with his sister. This aspect of his character makes him lonely. This resulted in his love of books, his hobby of fishing in the pond, and his love of nature. Alone in his dream world, he fights with an imaginary enemy with his play stick masquerading as a sword. He is filled with joy when he puts up a make-believe telegraph wire made of thread. Thus his very heart when his mother tears it unknowingly. With the help of such trivial incidents, the author is able to portray the simple and natural impulses of a small child with limited exposure to life. Opu resembles in many ways the author in his childhood days. Opu's sister Durga is the other principal character of the novel. She is 6 years older than Opu. She too has beautiful eyes. The story starts with her sitting in front of the old aunt, hungrily watching the old aunt eating, eagerly expecting to get a few morsels. She is constantly derided, often beaten, never quite loved, and this is especially heartbreaking. Because she is a girl, she never gets as much food, is berated for not doing housework, is never taught to read, and lives a jungly, solitary existence. In other words, the story plainly captures the ways in which women were powerless, less valued, and utterly mistreated. How many of you, the new generation youngsters, have ever thought of how a lady feels when she is continually taunted by others just because she has no earning source and needs to depend on others for feeding her family? What happens if the lady is from such a religious community that does not permit her to marry again? What happens when the lady reaches the eventide of her life? While reading the initial parts of the magnificent novel Pather Panchali, you will encounter the answers to such questions on which perhaps you have never cast a thought before. The first section of the novel, titled Bollali Balai, gives us the idea of an odd but widely practiced kind of marriage custom in many remote villages of the 19th century Bengal. As poverty was a much prevalent phenomenon, men took polygamy as a means of livelihood. They looked forward to receiving dowries and also moved from one in-law's house to another in rotation to lead a life without earning on their own, but rather enjoying on what they got during those visits to their in-laws. Indi Thakurun was also married to one such man who had once left her parents' house for another wife's home, but never returned. Indi Thakurun later on spent her life with her parents, and following her brother's death, she had nobody other than her distant cousin Horihar to live with. But still she had to change her habitat every now and then, just like a water hyacinth does. But every time her paths led her to Harihar's place ultimately. The main point of cultural consequence could be notified in the last segment of the first section. The rudest face of Hindu caste system is unveiled with the narration of Indit Thakurun's death scene. Following an argument with Sarbojaya, Indit Thakurun left Harihar's house. As her health was not going well for the few previous days, she could not reach her temporary home outside the village. Rather, she had to stop at a locality where low caste dwellers stayed. As soon as her condition started deteriorating, the locals could surely understand that she was going to die, but none of them came forward to pour water into her drying throat. They thought that this might destroy Indit Thakurun's Brahmin identity, in addition to making themselves even more undesirable in the view of the upper caste community, as well as in the view of their supreme lord. By the time a person from the Brahmin community reached the spot to feed her water, she had already passed away. The second section, Aam Aatir Bhepu, completely revolves around the young lad Opu. But throughout this section, Durga was also a dominating character. Here, Bibhutibhushan has successfully portrayed the sweet and sour relationship shared by all siblings. At one point, Durga would scold and even beat Opu for disclosing her involvement in the mango stealing activity in the neighborhood orchard. At another point, she would convince her brother at the next moment by offering him something tasty to gobble, and most of the time the scrumptious item would be mangoes again. Basically, the second chapter mainly narrates some events rather than highlighting any major cultural issue. The last chapter, Okrur Sangbad, focuses on the ever prevailing concern regarding the discrimination between rich and poor in the undivided Bengal region. Here, Bibhutibhushan has again succeeded to depict how a Brahmin housewife feels when she has to transform herself into a housemaid because of poverty. While reading the fine description, we can clearly sense the pain of Sarbojaya, and at this point, there could hardly be any person who will be able to hold his tears back. Moreover, the treatment of her son Opu, received from the person who gave her shelter, also magnifies the way poor were treated at that period by the elite society. At last, Sarbojaya found the torture intolerable and decided to move to her home back in the village Nishchindipur along with Opu. The novel marks a dramatic end with Sarbojaya and Opu heading for their village but getting confused about the right direction towards it. This bears the testimony of people at different points in their lifetime when they get perplexed about their goals and tracks. Indeed, Pather Panchali is a complete chronicle of the ups and downs experienced by an individual throughout his lifetime, and also a testament of some notable cultural practices practiced in the undivided Bengal. So, here we conclude our discussion of Pather Panchali by Bibhutibhushan Bandopadhyay. I hope you enjoyed this session. Thank you.